Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Raybush. With me, as always, is Philma Kenzie.
Oh.
And, nailed it, Phil. Once again. Nailed it.
Good to know.
Did you pick Grosso here?
Yes, I did. Hell yes.
Yeah, I think we both kind of nailed it, to be honest, because we are going to talk about the scoring of this fight, which was, of course, Grosso versus Shevchenko in the apparently inaugural UFC Noche event. Why didn't they name it Pelea Noche, by the way? Why is it just Noche?
Don't know. Just UFC
Night.
night.
Strange, right? Normally it's fight night. Why isn't it Pelea Noche, or whatever the appropriate grammatical version of that phrase would be? I don't know.
So yeah, just how lame it was that there was all this kind of generally Mexican buzz about it, and you're like, Apex card.
There was a crowd. The crowd was good.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't an Apex card. It was
at T-Mobile.
Yeah, T-Mobile.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Paradise, Nevada.
Yeah, which is basically Las Vegas. No, the crowd was good. The Mexican crowd, there were a lot of
places. The same place as the Apex at all is miles away from there.
Well, the big events used to happen in Vegas all the time, Phil. Just not at the Apex. No, the Mexican crowd and the Mexican American crowd was fantastic, and you heard a lot of Viva Mexicos and a lot of hilariously one-sided. I've really come to appreciate that over time, just like the extremely one-sided nature of certain crowds. Like Brazilian crowds going dead silent when a Brazilian loses in Brazil is always funny.
Yeah, they are the worst losers of all time.
Yeah. And then you can appreciate other crowds. Like I really don't slight them for that. You know, you're there to root for your people, like whatever. But then there are more gracious crowds in other parts of the world. People who will cheer for whoever. There are crowds who will boo and then be turned around by a savvy remark from the fighter that they thought they didn't like. I believe that happened on this night. I think it was, maybe it was Kyle Nelson who was getting booed despite having obviously beaten Fernando Padilla, and then gave them a Viva Mexico, and they sort of changed their minds and gave him some consolation cheers. So, yeah, it was a fun live experience, a pretty solid card in terms of action all the way through, and it looked fine on paper. It wasn't like gangbusters lineup, but I thought it played out well, and there was enough interesting stuff sprinkled throughout. But the main event, of course, Alexa Grosso, Valentina Shevchenko, and we're going to talk about the scoring, but I will just say up front here that live, I scored it for Shevchenko, whom I picked. And in rewatching it, I thought, you know what? A draw feels about right. I don't know that there's a convincing way. I think the only convincing way to score a draw would be to give round one a 10-10, which they never do, but it is a very even round. The way that they arrived at the draw score is completely asinine. We will talk about that. But based on how the fight was either like Valentina winning long portions or Grosso winning big moments, and how evenly split it felt between those two polls, a draw feels about right. This fight was a draw.
So, yeah, this reminded me of Mark Hunt, Bigfoot Silver.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
The way that it went. But in terms of, like, you're like, philosophically, a draw for this fight feels absolutely fine.
Right.
And then you look at how the actual scorecards went, and you're like, no.
That's wrong.
No.
That's not right. Yeah. Exactly like that. It just
can't happen.
Overall, if this were Pride rules, a draw would have been the perfect score. It just felt very evenly split. Although if it were Pride rules, probably Grosso would have won, right?
Yeah, for the sort of more effort to finish kind of silliness.
Although even, Shevchenko had a strong effort to finish in round 3. So, even there.
Yeah. one of the things about this is this the best fight of Valentina Shevchenko's career?
This is the thing. Now I have learned to hate her again, largely because she had the funniest and saltiest post-fight excuse I've ever heard. Better than the last one. She went up there and in front of the extremely proud, on Mexican Independence Day, Mexican crowd said, "I think the judges felt the pressure because it was Mexican Independence Day."
Nice.
She accused the judges of affirmative action scoring, and that's why Grosso got a draw, by the way. They didn't even give her a win. They scored it a draw because of reverse racism, I guess.
I did also enjoy after the fact when DC was talking to Grosso and he was like, yeah, I felt like my punches were stronger and that's why I was the winner. He was like, it was a draw.
You just get to keep your belt, because she gets to keep her belt, it does turn out that a draw is the funniest way for Shevchenko to lose.
Mm.
Because she doesn't even lose. She just doesn't get her belt back. It's going to be such a letdown. But yeah, that helped me learn to hate her again. But the reason that I had to learn to hate her again is because a lot of her fights have been fun lately. Because she's been getting pushed. The fight with Lauren Murphy sucked because it was classically one-sided, but Andrade, she was pushed really hard and therefore destroyed Andrade. And then Maya and Tayla Santos, I thought, was a very entertaining fight, actually. So, I don't know if this was the most fun Shevchenko fight of all time, but it was up there. Anytime Shevchenko gets pushed, and I think what this fight did cement for me is that Grosso, maybe not to the extent that she can dominate her, she obviously can't, like Sean Strickland did to Israel Adesanya, but in a similar kind of mold, that Grosso does represent a sort of perfect foil for Shevchenko. Because she is a fighter who has a sort of presence in a range where Valentina is not comfortable. A fighter who feels confident in being physical with Shevchenko, but it's not possible to completely outclass her at range either. At least not until much later in the fight. And even then she remains dangerous. And as it turns out, this is just a style against which Valentina cannot convincingly win. Though I do still think there is an argument for her winning it, just as there's an argument for Grosso winning it. Because again, the fight was basically a draw. It felt very, very even.
I think based on the old metric of who won more convincing rounds, you can argue that Shevchenko maybe should have edged it. Because I think she has 2 convincing rounds and Grosso has 1. Which
do you think are the convincing Shevchenko rounds?
Wait a minute. Let me think about it.
It's round 3.
I think 1 it's 1 and 3. And with Grosso, it's 2.
2, yeah. Yeah, because I think both 4 and 5 are actually quite difficult. And those are ones where a lot of people seem very certain. I actually found 1 to be as the least consequential round. In my most recent rewatch, I thought it was actually pretty difficult to score because about halfway through that round, Grosso starts getting shit done.
That's very true. I do remember Shevchenko's landing a bunch of body kicks early, but then so it starts landing basically it's at the beginning. Grosso is like, I managed to trick her last time with the southpaw, and now let's try going orthodox, and let's see how she deals with that. And Shevchenko is immediately just like,
oh, thank God.
This is such a relief.
Yeah, she just starts blasting her with body kicks, and then Grosso, goes back to southpaw, and she starts getting some licks in. I would probably still lean slightly towards Valentina for that round, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
But rounds 4.
So it probably is philosophically a draw. It's probably one clear round, isn't it?
Yeah. And let's talk about rounds 4 and 5, and we can sort of sideways walk our way into discussing the technique and the strategies of this fight. But first, this is what everyone's talking about. And it is interesting to me because these are both two classically difficult to score rounds, particularly round 5, which for those who don't know, the reason this fight ended up as a split draw is because Mike Bell, the judge, made round 5 a 10-8 for Alexa Grosso, which is, I think everyone agrees, even people who thought Grosso won, a terrible scorecard.
Is one of the worst individual scorecards I can remember seeing, because given how the boundary between a 10-8 and there's an argument to be made that like maybe scoring shouldn't be like this, but it is like this. Everyone knows that it's like this, and that's how everyone prepares for fights to be. Right? You can't make arguments based on how hypothetical scoring could be. But everyone knows the boundary between you scoring a 10-9 and the opponent scoring a 10-9 is much less than the boundary between you scoring a 10-9 and you scoring a 10-8.
Right.
You have to do wild shit to win a 10-8 traditionally in MMA.
You have to.
That's what people, that's what people prepare for. That's what people know. Is that you can there's wide variance in the ways that you can win a round.
Yes.
This is a really close round. There is no way it's within the variation for like even the most generous 10-8 imaginable.
Yeah, it's close enough that I still think there is a very viable argument that it's Shevchenko's round.
Sure.
So if that is even plausible, it cannot by definition be a 10-8.
Yes, exactly. She's in terms of the damage dealt, I think she does win the round. Her shots are harder. Like Grosso lands a bunch. It's sort of undefended shots because it's on the ground. But by shots from like back mount are not actually traditionally very damaging. Meanwhile, she gets cleanly jabbed up for like the first half of the round.
The shots she landed on top of Shevchenko were quite hard and clean. It's just the thing is that most of the shots she threw in that sequence did not land that cleanly. Most of them come off the gloves or shoulders of Shevchenko. There's a couple of hammer fists to the ear, maybe like 4 or 5 that are pretty good. And then in my mind, only one like mounted punch actually sticks out as being super cleanly landed when Shevchenko was trying to turn back into half guard. That forced her to immediately bail and change her mind because she took one right in the fucking mouth. But most of the shots thrown there are not landed. And the rear naked choke was not particularly close to being finished, though it was difficult to tell at first from the camera angle. And that is 1.5 minutes of the round. Whereas 3.5 minutes of the round, Shevchenko is winning quite clearly. She must land upwards of a dozen very clean jabs. Very clean. And I know maybe you have an idea out there, listener, that, they're just jabs. These are like shots that are snapping Grosso's head back. These are hard shots that are landing and undefended and not seen and not reacted to. So they are landing as clean punches land. I think there's a very viable argument to give it Shevchenko's round. I'm fine with it being a Grosso round too, because she gets an attempt to finish, and the one super clean shot she lands on Shevchenko in that sequence is by far the hardest punch of the round. So, and there's a bunch of other hard shots that aren't quite as clean mixed in there. So fine, but 10-8 is literally impossible.
My main argument for it would be that, honestly, that if that was my fighter and I was in the corner, that I was in Val's corner, and if that was the first round instead of the last round, and Val came back to my corner, I'd be like, "You lost that round. Fight like you lost that round."
Right.
Because it has two things which the judges respond very strongly to.
Yeah.
Which is that it has a long period of a dominant control position, and that dominant control position will happen towards the end of the round. Those things which are in the scoring criteria, should that be as weighted as heavily as it is in the scoring criteria? No. Does that, do you still, does that still tend to, dictate what happens to people's careers? Yes.
That's going to sway at least one judge.
With someone on your back.
That's going to sway at least one judge. It's a big swing of momentum. It looks like a sequence that might have finished the fight. Yeah, it's not optically good. So absolutely, a good cornerman would be
I don't. Like you said, I don't have a strong opinion on who won the round. In many ways, I feel like Valentina did more damage, but I'm just realistically, if you're in that fighter's corner, you have to assume that you probably lost it because that's just how the judges work, and you can't live in a fantasy world where you're where you score fights the way you want to see them. You have to score them based on how it's gonna, how the outcomes are gonna come out. That said, obviously you want to have rounds scored based on people not going completely insane.
Right.
Giving 10-8 rounds for borderline draws.
I like to think that Mike Bell made it a 10-8 because he was so disgusted by the fact that Valentina threw away a very strong round trying to go for a head and arm throw.
I said this on Twitter. They were, they're apparently having a judges seminar on 10-8s and when to give them. And I was like, yeah, there's some controversy about the new plan for people to have an automatic 10-8 awarded against them for whenever they fuck up a head and arm throw.
It was the first one she attempted all fight and it backfired so badly. I was sitting on the couch watching this. I was screaming not again. I thought she was about to get choked out.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
On a much...
The other part of it is that I thought that it was the most consistent one. I don't want to say it's the most consistent controlled performance of Valentina Shevchenko's career, but we were talking about we mentioned the Leon Edwards thing.
Yeah.
It was as in terms of being assertive.
Yes.
It was as Leon Edwardsy as I could have possibly hoped from Val.
It really was. We were worried about, and some people pointed out, she trains with her brother-in-law or whatever. She's always been a small camp product who just kind of travels around to other small, insignificant camps. So maybe that explains why she doesn't seem to adjust well. She actually made a lot of good adjustments for this fight. She was clearly more aggressive from the outset. Now that went away a bit, which we'll talk about. Part of the matchup, I think, that Shevchenko just does not like having to fight that way, particularly against somebody like Grosso. If this was somebody less physically imposing, or perhaps if Shevchenko herself were closer to her physical prime, she could have maintained that throughout the fight. But still, a very credible effort at standing her ground and being much more assertive. That really...
That's what you were basically saying, right? You were saying she needs to work off her jab.
Yeah.
And control Grosso, because Grosso showed that she can't really deal with it that well.
Yeah.
And, for the most part, she really did that. And, for all the... that it did sort of go away towards the... it did go away, sort of after the first round to some extent. The fact that she was ending the fifth round so strongly before she farted it all away was that was genuinely really impressive.
Yeah, and it didn't go away entirely. It actually, what I noticed is it went away for a bit after the second round when she got knocked down.
Yeah.
That was when she fell back on her more defensive instincts, but she was still, she found some assertiveness. She was throwing more combinations, just 2 punches, almost all of them, but a couple of 3-punch combinations late as she started to get more comfortable. And even then, when she was on the back foot, she did recognize the main thing I noticed, which is that Grosso cannot deal with her jab in the southpaw versus southpaw stance. And the problem is that Grosso, this really stood out to me this time. Grosso, when she's in southpaw, and this is something you would expect, right? If you're fighting out of your more natural stance, your just general positioning is worse. She has an idea of what combinations to throw. She can throw them with power, but she's really, really square to Shevchenko whenever she's in southpaw. And certainly in the fourth and especially in the fifth round, Shevchenko was I can pivot around you with jabs all day. She was just stepping inside her lead foot, like it barely even took a sidestep to get there because, as I said, Grosso was super square. Her feet were like basically wide open for Shevchenko to get past her jab. What should be her lead hand and her lead foot should be the barrier to getting to that jabbing angle. And Shevchenko just did it for free, basically, over and over late in the fight. So even being less assertive, the opening that stood out last time was there in exactly the same way. In the later rounds. So, yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I thought a pretty strong performance from Shevchenko. And I think what really stood out to me here was not that I did not think it was a particularly good performance from Grosso, to be honest.
Not really. Not in terms of the... Yeah, because you're like, what were the things that she did better what are the things that she did well in the last fight that she was able to build on this time?
Yeah.
There isn't much. She was able to get up more when she was taken down.
Yeah.
Her takedown defense was not really that much better.
No.
I think she was able to, one of the things was that she was simply able to outwork Val in the clinch.
Yep. Which she still had moments of this time, for sure. This is where, like, Valentina seemed genuinely shook in the clinch with Grosso.
That is one of the more kind of surprising elements of it, is that there were moments where, like, Val was just driven out of the clinch exchanges by the sheer, like, by just... I don't know, it wasn't even like she wasn't overpowered. It was just like she wasn't ready to be in there with someone who's going to be throwing as much offense.
Grosso is powerful enough that Valentina can't just like lock her down or feel super confident in using her own strength. And perhaps part of this is her having lost a step as she ages. But Grosso was using what looked like physical parity really aggressively. And yeah, Valentina clearly hated it. Like, she literally froze up in the clinch on multiple occasions. She froze up when Grosso was hitting her with the fingertip game knees. She was like, very funny. I mean, if you have it in your heart to hate Valentina, these moments are very funny because it's like, you're so stupid. What are you doing? She's like getting kneed in the head, and it's happening, and it keeps happening, and she's just like insisting on trying to keep her hand on the ground. She does not react to like...
It's like she's cheating. She's cheating. Ow!
She did not react. It happened...
Getting beaten up.
It happened in round 2 after she got knocked down. Grosso just started throwing body knees and then just like collar tie right hooking her, hockey punching her. And Valentina was just frozen. Like, she was just not reacting. And she wasn't, like, not even defensively. She was just getting punched in the face a bunch of times. It's like, what are you doing, Val? Do something. Why are you just standing there letting her hit you? But I think that speaks to the sort of, it is sort of enlightening as to, like, why she has the style she has. She does not like the prospect of being stuck in a mutually dangerous range or position with somebody who hits hard enough and is big and strong enough to do work there. And, yeah, like that's what I mean when I say that Grosso is like, while I don't think she could ever dominate Shevchenko because she has much bigger holes in her game than somebody like Sean Strickland. At least she has holes of which Shevchenko is better at exploiting than is the case with Strickland Adesanya, because I doubt that Izzy could out wrestle Sean Strickland even if Sean was a worse wrestler. But she's just like, Valentina is never going to be comfortable fighting Alexa Grosso. This, I think, is like the cleanest kind of performance she can have, and it's a performance which is marked by really decisive moments from Alexa Grosso throughout in multiple rounds, where she just appeared to overwhelm Shevchenko.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where, you know, you can see psychologically why Shevchenko has developed the wrestling as maybe in many ways like the primary core of her game. because it allows her to have controlled decisions.
Exactly.
Times and not be in equal exchanges. Yeah, you just found this that no, I think the commentators mentioned this at one point. They were like, Grosso, she just seems to hit harder than Shevchenko. And I didn't really feel like that was necessarily like what was happening.
I think she hits hard enough. She hits hard enough that Shevchenko does not like it and doesn't feel it's worth the risk. But
it was the reactions.
Yeah.
That Grosso would get tagged on the way in and would shake it off.
Yeah.
And but then she would chase down Shevchenko with like a 1-2, would be like visibly not necessarily physically rattled, although she obviously was in round 2, but like would just be like, oh my god, I hated that. Would just back out, and then
you could see it on her face. Yeah. And there were also a lot of instances where the commentary thought Grosso was landing a super clean shot, and what was actually happening is that Shevchenko was anxiously yanking her head straight back as the shot was connecting. And I think it was less the impact and more her viscerally reacting to the knowledge that she was about to get hit clean. That it just made it look like the shot that made the shots appear more telling.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a matchup that makes her uncomfortable. And I'm sure part of that is the physical decline, which, was bound to happen eventually. She's 35. She still looks very fast, but if you watch some older fights, she was blazing quick in a way that she isn't perhaps now. But part of it, too, is, I just think Grosso is clearly more than big enough for flyweight. She's filled out for this division. And she is not a massive puncher, but she is a more than respectable enough puncher that, you just don't want to be trading with her. And she's way more willing to trade. That's the main thing, too. It's the psychological thing that Grosso believes that she can win trades that should be 50-50, and Valentina does not like 50-50 anything. She doesn't like anything to feel that double-sided, double-edged.
This series of fights did actually do one thing, which is also it made me feel much more sort of sanguine about Rose Namajunas' chances if she ever fought Shevchenko. Because before I just would have been like, she's just going to get absolutely thrashed in the clinch and probably wouldn't be able to do all that much on the outside.
Right.
But now that I've seen how much Shevchenko dislikes having someone who can cover range quickly, often with a strong left hand.
Yeah.
I think that I would actually find that fight much more interesting than...
It could still very well be a 50-50 kind of matchup in that way, that Shevchenko would be able to overpower Rose. Then again, despite the fact that she can be overpowered, she's not super physical, and we have seen her psychologically overwhelmed in those kinds of fights. Rose is a better wrestler than Alexa Grosso, no question.
Yes. She's a better wrestler, and most of what has broken Rose has been generally physically damaging clinch games.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
Which, again, Val doesn't necessarily have.
Yeah, or when Kowalkiewicz, not only in the clinch but also on the ground, Kowalkiewicz has always stood out as somebody who is surprisingly powerful and aggressive when she's on top of you or in the clinch. And both of those were really uncomfortable. Valentina doesn't really do that. I mean, she probably could have banked really strongly a lot more of these rounds if she was more aggressive on top. Then again, when Grosso was given space, she proved to be very adept at just making something happen, just creating a scramble so that she could worm her way out. So there's a reason that Shevchenko didn't go for that more. But that's what she always does. She never goes for it more. She always wants to prioritize control on the ground over damage. And yeah, totally. Rose, as a long-limbed, hard-hitting fighter who comes forward, throwing hard punches, she would absolutely make Valentina uncomfortable. No question. They should do that matchup.
Yeah, they might as well. But yeah, I also find myself, with Shevchenko, I think with the general sort of size and baseline athleticism of the fighters coming up.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be much tougher for her now that she's sort of back in the mix.
Yeah, right.
She gets put in with an Aaron Blanchfield or a Manon Fiorot or whatever.
Right, yep.
These are going to be fights where it will be challenging for her to avoid being put in uncomfortable exchanges.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it will be, again, like, if you don't like Shevchenko, which, I've sort of garnered at least a grudging respect for her ability to, what was, like, by and large, a much more assertive performance that I didn't think she was capable of.
Mm-hmm.
It will be, like, pretty funny if her career sort of ends. The most controlled and technical women's fighter of all time and so on. It does sort of end up being finished, essentially, with a flubbed head and arm throw.
Yeah, right. And then ends up in a post-prime career where she just like suddenly can't seem to keep the lid on anybody. I mean, I think that may very well be where it's heading. Because the thing with Valentina is that her game is really limited. It really is. There are like 5 things she likes to do. She's got a jab and a 1-2, and she's got the jab and the right hook. And she's got the counter right hook. Then she has a couple spins, which basically never work, and can in fact prove to be suicidal. And she's got the takedowns and a very control-oriented, like sitting in your half guard, maybe hitting you every now and then, kind of grappling game.
And open stance body kick, head kick.
Yeah, that too, right? But she's quite limited, and anything that happens in mid-range, those limitations really stand out. And you can get to mid-range if you're willing, if you can not get hit cleanly by her, but also, excuse me, but also, oh my God, another sneeze creeping up. But also if you're just willing to take her shots, which more and more people are going to be able to do, with the combined facts that A, the division is better than when she became champion. There are some up-and-coming fighters who look quite solid. And B, she's lost a step. So more people are just going to be willing to eat her shots and extend exchanges, and she hates it. That is like the primary limitation of her game. And you saw it here, like, on 2 occasions, in fact, she got punished pretty hard by Grosso for, like, trying to turn the heat up on her. Again, like, trying to be more assertive. The first occasion was in round 2, where she got knocked down because Grosso just kept the exchange going. I think it was like a southpaw 1-2-3, and it was the 3 that caught her.
It was a 1-2, and then I think Shevchenko sort of peeled out to Grasso's right, and kept trying to keep the exchange to Grasso's left, and kept trying to get the exchange going. And Grosso was like, "Oh, you've actually just I'm standing in orthodox now." And just punched her straight down the middle.
But what Shevchenko was doing in trying to have an aggressive approach was literally 3 1-2s in a row. 1-2 sidestep, 1-2 sidestep, 1-2, and then she got countered. So, of course she got countered, because that is it. Like, it's not just, it's a chicken and egg thing, as it usually is. Like, is it her mental limitations, her stylistic sort of box, that, all fighters have one pretty much, or is it a technical limitation? Which one precedes the other? Do they both, is it a feedback loop kind of thing? But however you want to explain it, the fact of the matter is that put into that kind of environment where both fighters have opportunities to hit each other, she just doesn't have that many ideas to go to. She doesn't have a feel for it, which is why you don't see her in that range, like, she can't be in that kind of range trying to, like, grab little bits of initiative. She's not in there feinting. She's not varying her timing. And in this case, she's not even varying the punches she's throwing. It is 3 1-2s in a row, all of them coming on the exact same tempo, all of them thrown with equal power, all of them followed by the exact same sidestep to the new angle to try it again. It's very predictable. And that's because she's not equipped to have that kind of fight. If she's at long range and she can keep you there, then she can afford to be predictable, as she could at long portions of this fight. Because, okay, stop the jab. Okay, you know it's coming. What are you going to do about it? But in the pocket, her predictability, her limitations, her inflexibility will continue to cost her, I think, going forward. So, yeah, not a great performance from Grosso, but she got the big moments she needed, and I think she's just, as I suspect a few other women in this division will be, well equipped to get big moments against Shevchenko, which Valentina's game is not actually, it is not that deep, the kind of control that she asserts, that she can actually, by force, prevent people from getting to those moments.
Yeah. It definitely feels like we're back in one of those. We're in one of those sort of past the belt eras. I do not think that we've seen. This isn't like Whittaker Adesanya, where we've seen a dominant champion replaced by the next dominant champion.
Yeah, you think Grosso? You're confident Grosso is going to beat Blanchfield? Because I sure as hell am not. Right? Yeah. With that wrestling game. Yeah, I don't know. She could very well lose the belt in her very next fight if that's who she gets or somebody comparable. I don't know, but I wouldn't be confident in her beating Furo either, or confident in her beating Rose if Rose could come back and work her way up to a title shot. I think that's still a fight I would like to see. So, yeah,
fight though.
Yeah, it was. It was good. It was interesting. It had a nice story, sort of like Adesanya Pereira won. It had like a nice, each round was sort of defined by a different thing. I enjoyed the change up from Shevchenko quite a bit. She had already earned my grudging respect, as you know, and as many of the listeners were disappointed to know. But you'll be relieved to hear, dear listener, that she got it back immediately with those post-fight comments where I was just like, fuck you, shut up. So even if that if it was possible to prove that happened, which I'm not saying it's impossible, you have zero evidence of it. You're simply salty, and read the room, lady. This is not the time to say that. There's a bunch of Mexican people here who want you to lose, and you're just like, yeah, the judge actually liked all of you people too much to give me the fight I obviously won, which she didn't obviously win it.
Yeah, so, I mean, technically, the decision did go against her because of one completely insane thing that a judge did, but
one completely insane thing which did insanely favor Grosso, but
yes.
Maybe someday it will come out that guy was afraid of Mexican people, and that's why he delivered that insane 5th round score. But I kind of doubt it. And also, look, I say this as someone who did score this for Shevchenko, and I still think that is a perfectly reasonable score. But it wasn't obvious. So what are you going to do?
I think the media was absolutely 50% split on this one.
Yeah, you want to cry robbery, win more definitively than that. All right. Well, that's enough for segment 1. A very interesting fight, continuing saga, and we shall see what becomes of the women's flyweight belt in the next year or two. Next up, we have another fight night card around the corner. This one main evented by Rafael Fiziev. He's taking on Mateusz Gamrot, and honestly, this looks like I'm sure I'm cursing it as we speak. It looks like a really good card. Certainly by fight night standards, I would say it's more stacked than this Noche card we just had. So we are going to talk about that main event next. We've also got Bryce Mitchell, Dan Ige on there. We might find some time to talk about that. And then it's possible we come back at the end of today's episode, because there was also Jack Della Maddalena in an interesting fight with Kevin Holland, and a couple other highlights further down on last weekend's card as well. So all of that, possibly more, possibly just some of that. I don't know what I'm saying. We'll be back after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about this upcoming Fight Night main event that is Rafael Fiziev versus Mateusz Gamrot. And this is a fight that I would say is not as easy to wrap one's head around as it feels like it should be. Because yeah, go on. What do you think? What do you think?
Both these guys are essentially part of the, at the moment, broadly failed next generation of lightweight that was to come up from, underneath your G's and Poiriers and so on and replace them. Because all of these guys have kind of been resoundingly turned aside by the older generation in one way or another.
Yeah, and to be fair to Gamrot, I mean, that man already had quite a long career before he got to the UFC. I mean, his first fight was in 2012. And he's 32, so whether it's fair to call him a next gen, I don't know. There's some question there. I would say Fiziev, certainly. Fiziev has been, perhaps not permanently, but he has been thrust back by the still strong old guard of, like, the top 5 lightweight action fighters.
Yeah. A bunch of people were like, these guys should be given their chance to take over, to have their own shots, and to, fair enough. I was among them.
Of course.
And they got those shots, and broadly they haven't been able to win due to them. The only one who's sort of remaining is, in some ways, it seems like, at least among the hipster analyst community, the least popular, Ahmed Sarukian, who is the only one who's still going strong.
Why is he the least popular? he's really good.
Something to do with, like, his wrestling and or striking technique isn't pretty enough. I don't know.
What? Oh. The striking I can maybe agree, but his wrestling isn't pretty? So people look at Sarukian and Gamrot and they're like, wow, these scrambles are so beautiful. Well done, Gamrot?
Yeah, I think so.
But they were both scrambling exceptionally well. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm still
his shot is uglier than Gamrot's. I believe this is the rationale, and so he should lose to all of them.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Gamrot is such a darling among our analyst friends. It sometimes perplexes me because I get it to an extent. And Lord knows I have like my limited fighters that I like for no particularly clear reason, but he is a very limited fighter. Very limited. And Sarukian much less so, I would say. And I think that has been borne out in their results. That Sarukian essentially lost a bad decision to Gamrot and otherwise has been unbeaten since his close loss to Islam Makhachev. So, he's the good one. Fiziev got pushed back by Gaethje. Not a bad performance. I mean, I don't think it damning. I'm not sure that there are a ton of other fighters not named Gaethje or Poirier that can do exactly that to him. But
it was a very close fight.
It was, absolutely. Yeah, very close. So not definitive. I think Fiziev will still be doing big things going forward. Gamrot, I'm not so sure. The man can't seem to win a decision that doesn't feel kind of hinky.
So, I mean, essentially the issues are that his stand-up game is rote in the extreme.
I don't even know
being
if rote
primarily like timings on. I mean, essentially, he's the weird thing about him being an analyst, Donnie, is the construction of his game is sort of that of an early 2000s welterweight.
This is why I don't get it. The fascination.
like more aggressive Tyron Woodley, where it's level change and right hand, the classic MMA change-up.
Yeah.
Just does them a lot, and Tyron Woodley didn't do them very much.
Yeah, I wouldn't even necessarily say that rote is the word to describe Gamrot's striking. I would just say severely limited. Because I think you put him next to somebody like Tsarukyan is more rote as a striker. Tsarukyan looks more like Kamaru Usman in his clearly thinking through the combinations, doesn't necessarily have the feel to kind of vary the timing and adjust distance mid-exchange kind of thing, like that what I would think of as a truly organic fighter would have. Like, I'd love to see Tsarukyan on the double end bag, you know? The little, people know what that is, as the one that's a little inflated ball between two bungee cords, and it bounces around as you hit it, and it's supposed to develop your, like, quick reflex timing and your rhythm as well, like rhythm relative to the opponent. Speed bag also does this, but you can't throw real punches at a speed bag as well. I suspect that Gamrot's probably better at that than Tsarukyan. I think he's got a feel for distance and timing, but he doesn't throw combinations, and he doesn't set up his right hand. So it's like he just does one thing with this natural ability to feel the range and the timing of his shots. And the other thing he does is hit a beautiful takedown shot with that timing. But it's just those two things, really.
Yes, the other problem that also makes him sort of an early 2000s fighter is that he doesn't have like a super controlling or damaging top game.
Yeah. He has an alpha male ass ground game.
Yes. He is also, a very like prototypical alpha male fighter in many ways.
Yeah.
Uriah Faber would be... God, he is actually very similar to Uriah Faber, isn't he?
He is.
But yeah, so, I mean, the main question about this one then is Fiziev vulnerable to repeated shot takedowns? I think the answer is probably no.
Yep, doesn't seem like it.
He seems very hard to take down, in part because he's just very quick.
Yeah.
And he just fight scripts extremely fast, gets his hips back very quickly, is very, like, aggressive in clinch situations. Again, he's one of these people where, like Jose Aldo, being able to execute things quickly is, simply contributes to his takedown defense being very good because he can do lots of things in sequence very, very fast, and that he's just out of there. Basically, Aldo was also a, like, wonderful defensive technical wrestler, so everything he did was both technically flawless and executed quickly. But yeah, just Fiziev's ability to aggressively attack takedowns until he's out of there, you know, in the RDA fight does make you think it's going to be very hard for Gamrot to take him down in the early going.
Yeah.
Especially if you watch Gamrot just kind of getting shut down by Dariush. Second thing, just how much success like Tsarukyan had lighting up Gamrot with body kicks. Another one of the things that made that decision so terrible was that they just didn't seem to be scoring body kicks at all.
Well, hey, could work for him again. Like I said, the guy has a magical ability to pick up very, very close decisions, which mostly I think he lost.
And I
don't think he beat Jalen Turner.
I have that fight running as we're talking, and it's not a close decision. It's a really bad decision. It's really bad.
The Tsarukyan fight?
Yeah.
Yeah, it remains competitive, but it's pretty clearly, I believe we said so at the time, like, we're usually, as you saw in the last segment, we're usually pretty willing to concede that while we may have scored it one way or the other, this fight was close enough that it makes sense that I disagree with this decision. I think we said at the time, and we still feel that Tsarukyan Gamrot is simply a bad decision.
It's genuinely bad. But yeah, I mean, I find myself, is Fiziev a worse defensive grappler than Arman Tsarukyan? Probably very slightly, but I don't think it's enough to to matter when you take into account that he's just a lot faster and willing to get into defense and less willing to get into grappling exchanges, at least early.
Yeah.
I'm willing to say, I'm going to go out there. I'm willing to say that Rafael Fiziev is a better body kicker than Arman Tsarukyan.
Wow.
No.
Stop the presses. This is why we make the big bucks off of that Patreon. We make daring calls like this. Yeah, I mean, my feeling about this fight really is that if it were 3 rounds, I would pick Rafael Fiziev really with no question.
Yep.
Because I'd be like, well, he's going to do way more. The first 2 rounds from Rafael Fiziev, especially against an inactive striker, somebody who is largely evasive, and looking to time him with single shots, Fiziev can just overwhelm that kind of fighter with volume. And he's super fast, as you said. That speed means he has more than enough power to very possibly get knockdowns. I mean, Gamrot can be hurt. He was hurt in his last fight with Jalen Turner. I think he got hurt by Dariush as well, didn't he? Didn't he get knocked down by Dariush?
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think he got knocked down on like a counter left hand. So and he's going to kick the body, and first layer takedown defense is super strong, and that is where Gamrot's takedown offense is most effective. It's just blasting you off your feet with that initial timing. I'm not saying, obviously Gamrot has amazing scrambling ability. He can find his way through positions like few other fighters can, which is why the grappling portions of his fight with Tsarukyan were just as fun to watch as were Tsarukyan's scrambles with Makhachev. Because it was just like move, counter, counter, both guys just asking questions and answering them in rapid succession. Just does not accept an inferior position on the ground, Gamrot. And that should be applicable to his takedown game as well. But still, Fiziev physically and technically good enough to stop the initial shot. It's the fact that we're going to get into rounds 4 and 5 in this fight. I mean, provided that Fiziev doesn't finish Gamrot. That makes it a little more difficult to call. Because as we have discussed in the past, Fiziev is a fighter who pathologically slows down. And I say pathologically because, as we've determined, it is not really ever a product of the work the opponent is doing. Which is not to say that the opponent has no ability to tax Fiziev's cardio, but that given an opponent who does nothing, like Fiziev could be fighting a literal heavy bag and he'd be pretty winded after 2 5-minute rounds. Because that's what he does. He throws everything with full intensity. He really leverages that speed. So he's just a super explosive fighter. And he does a lot. He's not a patient fighter. He doesn't like to let a bunch of time expire where it feels like his opponent might be cooking up some way to get the initiative or whatever. He wants to stay on you. So, yeah, given a completely inactive opponent, he will still get tired after 2 rounds. And
it's one of the things I like about Fiziev. It's that he is just he is a fighter that's just sent to test us for our hubris. Because, all the time we're like, oh, this person should be more aggressive. This person needs to take the initiative and push the other one back and be first. And they need to go to the body and, build up attritional damage. And Fiziev does all these things and you're like, no, not like that.
Well, but it is true, not like that. He just needs to turn it down. He could be doing as much as he does and just turn 50% of it down to 50%.
Yeah.
And he'd be fine.
Normally we have to tell people to be more aggressive and more assertive. With him, it's like, don't rely on your defense a bit more. It is good.
It is good.
You don't always need to be first in exchanges. You don't really have to initiate everything at the cost of draining your stamina constantly.
And he's got a strong positional sense. He's quick on his feet. Like, he could move around, but he could also be very aggressive and just not. It's the fact that everything is explosive. And that is not a sustainable way to
aggressive
fight.
Just by double jabbing someone.
Exactly. Or even throwing his same combinations, but throwing half the punches with a half power. Just varying his intensity would make a huge difference. He could be equally aggressive in a less exhausting way. But that is his problem, and it means that if Gamrot sticks around, he may very well pick up moments, but is Gamrot RDA is the question then. Because RDA got moments late against Fiziev. RDA got takedowns late against Fiziev. But RDA is RDA. So his takedowns are like, I hit the shot and then I am grinding you up against the cage. I am cheese gratering your back against the fence, and I'm going to inexorably work to connect my hands and dump you to the ground, and then I'm going to stay there on top of you. RDA picked up the vast majority, I believe, of his control time in that fight in one round. No, he actually got a couple. But he picked up almost 2 full minutes of control time in round 4 off of 1 takedown. Actually, exactly the same amount. No, 2 seconds less. 1:46 of control time in round 3, according to UFC stats. Also off of 1 takedown. And then he controlled him in the clinch as well. But that's RDA. He likes to control people. He likes to stay in top position when he gets it. Does Gamrot? Does the possibility of Gamrot hitting more takedowns as the fight goes on actually mean Gamrot picking up rounds? Because even if Fiziev is exhausted, is
devastating top game as well.
Yeah, exactly. Even if Fiziev is too exhausted to scramble as well as he can early in a fight, is Gamrot going to keep top position? Because that has been the problem for him. He doesn't. It's just not built into his game. He's like Uriah Faber. He gets on you and he's like, okay, something else has to happen now. And it works for him because Gamrot himself has incredible cardio. But it's not a great way of banking rounds against an opponent that you can be pretty damn sure is going to be quite tired and a lot less effective for the better part of the last 15 minutes of this 5-round fight.
Yeah. The other thing which we noted was a common theme in the RDA and Gaethje fights. In some ways, this gave us a slightly... I think maybe gave us a misapprehension of Fiziev's cardio, is that when he's knackered, he'll come out in the round and he'll be like, well, time to spend it all, and he'll, go for a sudden burst of even higher activity when he's knackered. He did this against Gaethje and won the first round, the first minute of their last round. And he did it to RDA and knocked him out. Yeah. We were like, oh, maybe Fiziev does actually have good cardio. And then in retrospect, we were like, oh no, he just does that.
Yeah, it's like Rose against it's like Rose against Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Yeah,
he's got a new a slightly restored pool of explosion, but all he can do is explode. He's like me when I do laundry. I don't do laundry until I'm completely out of underwear, and then I go and wash my clothes. I'll do 1 load, which means 1/3 of the pile of laundry that's in my laundry basket. And I'll go do that, and then I have and I do all the underwear first, because that's the reason I decided to do laundry. So then I'm like, oh my God, I'm rich. I have 15 pairs of underwear. I'm going to wear 3 a day. And then I'm out again, right? He really is when he's flush, he's flush. That seems to be how Fiziev feels about his energy. But it is also that, clearly he has the ability to recuperate. The break does something for him, but he can't turn off the explosion. So he just exhausts it again.
Yeah, but even that, those moments in those rounds, those are clearly, that is an even higher pitch of aggression than he has throughout the rest
a little
of the
more
fight.
Desperate, yeah.
Yeah, he's I have to turn it on now. I think it's partially, I think a lot of his confidence comes from this, idea that he's super fast, super strong. It's him convincing himself.
Yeah.
Not realizing that he's absolutely knackering himself.
Yeah.
I think the main thing about this dynamic is that sort of, bridging onto your point you said earlier, it means that I'm not even sure if Gamrot's guaranteed to win those late rounds. But if Fiziev comes out with a burst of destructive energy, even if Gamrot survives it, which is highly possible,
sure,
might not have the actual offense to consistently win the round after that.
Right. Because is he going to control it? How is he going to bank rounds is the question. How does he ever bank rounds? And the answer is, at least for us, he doesn't. Not convincingly. Yeah. So, I mean, Jalen Turner is a much worse wrestler than either Tsarukyan or Fiziev. And he still didn't bank those rounds convincingly because the big things that were happening in those rounds were coming from the other side. And then against somebody who is a really strong defensive wrestler like Tsarukyan or like Beneil Dariush, which there is a possibility this fight could feel more like that. Where it's just like, oh, he can't get the takedowns. What else does he do? The guy's pressuring. He's coming at him with hard shots. He's just going to get hit because he doesn't have any depth in the pocket. He's just got his footwork. He moves. That is how Gamrot avoids getting hit, and it is not technical footwork. He is giving up the positional advantage to his opponent. He squares up. He lopes to the side. If the opponent is super fast and they have good ring-cutting tools like, say, a savagely fast and powerful body kick, they're going to get those shots off. And Gamrot can't do anything about it because he's already decided to do the one thing he can to get out of dodge, which is to just run, to just skirt away. So I have to pick Fiziev. And what you kind of have to. What I want to see here, I think this is a great opportunity because if Fiziev can address the problem that we have been talking about with him for some time, it is really the self-destructiveness is, I think, the primary issue with Fiziev's game. A sustainable Rafael Fiziev, I think, is a champion caliber fighter because he's clearly really fucking good. And he has a super broad and quite sophisticated game. He's got defense. He throws excellent combinations. He works the body. He attacks the legs. He can fight off the back foot. He can fight coming forward. He's a good defensive wrestler. He really has the full complement of skills you would want out of a top contender, and he is a beast of an athlete. All he needs to be able to do is to look like a more experienced fighter. He needs savviness. And it's possible that a fight like the one he just had with Justin Gaethje could have taught him that. I doubt we would see it realized quickly, but I would love to see a Rafael Fiziev who, like, on his path towards 33, 34 years old, just becomes progressively more relaxed and therefore more capable of staying in command of a fight without having to just pour gas onto the fire constantly. That he could just keep the simmer going.
I also love that the evolution of his game has to be the opposite to the one that we've seen from, like, the classic young veteran.
Right.
One that realizes that they have to finally use their athleticism and go for it. It's just like, it's always the opposite. It's always the opposite lesson for Fiziev. It's like, no.
But that's how it goes. I mean, that is a common thing.
Don't be the athlete.
That is a common thing with elite athletes. It's just, it really stands out in Fiziev's case because it does seem like he already has the technical precision to be able to do that. It is the psychological shift he needs to make, I think, to be comfortable not thrashing the opponent at all times. To be confident in his ability to control an opponent because he's so good and not because he's crushing them and making them scared. He should be content with just, like, denying them opportunities and working at them and picking away. That's a way to extend yourself through a fight, and then the explosions will be there whenever you actually need them. Whenever. So, yeah, I would love to see this as Fiziev testing himself, because I don't think Gamrot is an opponent who stands a particularly good shot of actually definitively beating him. And
it's very hard to see him winning in a way which isn't. It's not hard to see him winning.
Well,
it's hard to see him winning in a way which isn't.
Which we agree with.
Knackering Fiziev through just throwing himself at him.
Yeah. Well, it is frankly hard for me to see Gamrot winning a good decision.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say that, but I have strongly disagreed, less strongly with the last one, with Turner, but I have not been on side with a couple decisions Gamrot has picked up. I do not think he won these fights. And even if he has exactly that kind of fight, it is just, I didn't think he won those. I don't think he's going to win this. So I want to see Fiziev do the thing that MMA fighters, I was talking about this with Schwan Humes on Twitter the other day, that MMA fighters do seem uniquely averse to, I don't know, they just have a really hard time fleshing out their games or using cage time as a learning experience, which is why we get we had Raul Rosas last weekend. Did he learn anything from his previous fight? Well, he threw an overhand this time. But his main problem was not that he had no striking. That was obviously a problem. His problem was that he burned all of his energy and then got scared because he had no further ideas, and he had been fought at way too high an intensity early, and he clearly didn't learn anything about that. And this is the thing with MMA fighters. Every time I want to see a fighter go in there, I'm like, oh, Tom Aspinall, here's somebody you could clearly beat. Let's get some time in. Let's see how the rest of your game clicks. Let's, get an opportunity to test your ability because down the road, at least you should, there's going to be an opponent you can't just wipe out, and you'd better know how to handle yourself when it doesn't happen. So let's sort of manufacture that opportunity because you're going to win this fight anyway. MMA fighters do not do that. Boxers do. Boxers get rounds in. They get live rounds in front of a crowd against an opponent who really shouldn't be able to beat them, but they decide not to beat them with the ease with which they could because they want to get work in. MMA fighters do not do this. So,
well, I think that's partially obviously because the sport is incredibly volatile and it's extremely scary to be in there with someone when there are so many options for them to finish you.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And B, because it backfires so often to do that. It's why people who like to do that often have such sort of spotty careers. The classic example being Jorge Masvidal.
Sure.
Someone who would get rounds in against people and then often lose them to one flash knockdown and then get kind of robbed.
Sure. I'm not saying it's without risk. I'm just saying it is
there is a reason why MMA fighters are like that, because I think it is it's just a much less controllable sport than boxing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but it is, I think, symptomatic of the difficulty MMA fighters have with sort of cultivating new aspects to their games, which is why we're always so incredibly pleased when it happens. Fiziev could do it, man. He looks capable. I would love to see this as a fight where he shows up in round 3 and he's just not that tired. But I'm picking him pretty confidently. So, place your bets on Mateusz Gamrot now, devoted listeners. That's the way to do it when we pick a main event with any degree of confidence. But yeah, this is no Strickland Adesanya. I don't really see a consistent way for Gamrot to take his obvious advantages and actually turn them into clear rounds. I just don't.
Agreed.
All right, let's take a break then. When we come back, we've got Bryce Mitchell, Dan Ige. We had Jack Della Maddalena, Kevin Holland from last week. That'll probably do it, but we will talk about both of those after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Bryce Mitchell, Dan Ige are co-main eventing this Fiziev Gamrot Fight Night card.
Oh, no. This isn't the fight people care about.
No?
Oh, it's time for Muhammad Usman, Jake Collier. Come on. This is the real fight of the card.
Yes, you were quite upset at me when I overlooked that matchup.
This, I said it at the time, that has got to be, with the sole exception of maybe Muhammad Usman against Huggy Bear.
Oh yeah,
this is the greatest matchup they can make at heavyweight. It's like it's just like watching Kamaru Usman, but wearing an extremely movement restricting sort of inflatable muscle suit.
Yeah, Kamaru Usman wearing like a really densely filled, puffy coat.
Yep.
That's like painted muscle color. Versus
against just like an extremely fat man.
Versus a slob. A guy who was a middleweight and is now at heavyweight because eating. And probably drinking too. Yeah, it really is a perfect heavyweight matchup. A guy who looks like he cuts to make 265 and a guy who uncut to go from 185 to 263.
I cannot honestly think of a heavyweight fight that has excited me more than this.
It's a good one.
Let's do Mitchell Ige.
All right, fine. Okay, we'll talk about the featherweights instead. Obviously not the most compelling matchup outside of the main event, but, you know, what can you do? This feels like Mitchell Topuria Redux to some extent.
Yes, it does.
A chance for Mitchell to get back his last loss against a hard-hitting, aggressive counterpuncher who is perhaps just not quite as physically imposing as Ilia Topuria. And also, well, I was going to say possibly not quite as good on the ground. We don't tend to see it that aggressively from Dan Ige, but Dan Ige pretty fucking hard to out-grapple. And pretty hard to take down. So, although according to UFC stats, he has only 56% takedown defense. What is that? Oh, it's from the Movsar Evloev fight.
Yes.
Where he just got taken down by one of the best wrestlers in the division over and over. Maybe there's room for that. I should pull that one up while we're talking about it to refresh my memory. But yeah, it feels like Mitchell Topuria too, basically.
I mean, I think... So, Ige has been taken down and controlled, whereas that has simply never happened to Topuria. I think that's the main sort of difference, is that most of the I think dials on Topuria are turned down somewhat for Ige. He is not as hard hitting. He is not. He is harder to take. Topuria is harder to take down.
Yeah, he's smaller. Ige. Ige is smaller, I'm pretty sure, than Topuria. And he's a good enough athlete, but Topuria is like elite physically. Ige is a plus athlete, but not a championship level athlete. And probably is also just although he's getting there and maybe is there, but historically has just not been as confident as Topuria. Topuria is a fearless fighter. Like, truly, he's been in fights where he's been badly hurt, and it really does not change the way he's fighting. He'll correct to the mistake. He'll be aware of the thing that hurt him, but he's not going to become like a lot less aggressive. He's not going to go Shevchenko mode and like turn off his A game because it got punished. He's going to figure out how to not get it punished or to punish the opponent even harder and get them back. Ige has not always been like that. Ige has had some slightly cumbersome performances where he's kind of fumbling his way towards the correct approach. He has for a long time now been a very good adjuster, but has not always come in brimming with the confidence of a guy who knows exactly how he wants to beat you. That being said, against a lesser degree of athlete, he has been looking like that kind of fighter lately. He has been looking quite assertive, even when he is playing more of a pure counter-punching game. He looks very difficult to overwhelm. He looks like he knows he can knock your block off if you try to push him too hard. But even so, there are moments even in fights like the one with Nate Landwehr where it's like he's kind of... Nate Landwehr is like on a physical par with him. And for that reason, the moment Landwehr decides he doesn't care about getting a hit anymore, he's making this fight pretty dicey. I don't think you can get away with doing that. I think Nate Landwehr would get smoked by Ilia Topuria. So that's the difference right there.
He got like badly hurt at least twice by Topuria, right?
Who's that?
Sorry, not by Topuria, by Ige Nagoya.
He did, yeah. Ige kept getting critical moments, knocking him down with left hooks to like seal rounds, and was otherwise like keeping the jab on him well, moving his feet well. But especially in like the third round of that fight, Landwehr was just coming after him, and he was getting moments because of it. I don't think you could do that against Topuria. I think he's that little bit sharper, that little bit more powerful, and also like he would just be offended, I think, if Landwehr thought that he could come after him. He would just stand his ground and throw shots, and the moment Landwehr had to back off, which he would, he'd get back onto him and lock his ass out of the fight for as long as it lasted before he got a finish. Danny Ige doesn't have that extra gear. Combination, I think, of physicality and the extreme confidence that probably comes as a product of it. But he can also be taken down, Dan Ige, and that is the other window of opportunity here that really made Bryce Mitchell's loss to Topuria as one-sided as it was. Because Bryce Mitchell is a good fighter. He is a very well-rounded fighter, and he is often surprisingly effective on the feet, but it was pretty clear in that last fight that if he couldn't get Topuria down, he was just going to get squeezed by him on the feet. That he really needed the full complement of his skills to be working, and that basically being stuck in a striking battle was not a comfortable experience for him, or one that it looked like he had a particularly good idea of how to win. So.
Yeah. Yeah, this one does seem... it seems like one where I sort of instinctively favor... in fact, I sort of found myself instinctively favoring Ige, like, when we came in. But I find myself wondering, is that just because, like, I like him more than Bryce Mitchell?
Yeah.
And because, you know, he superficially, like, resembles Ilia Topuria in the way that he strikes and so on. And I can just sort of see Ige being pasted over Topuria and kind of having that same game. Because I think some of the factors which made Mitchell struggle quite so much are not necessarily there to the same extent with Topuria. I mean, firstly, I think a lot of the reason why Mitchell looks so bad is that he was simply struggling to find his strikes on Topuria.
Yeah.
Like, Topuria was just kind of slipping most of the jabs that Mitchell threw, and he looked very unsure of his own range.
Yeah. Couldn't actually lay a glove on him to get a feel for how to time him.
Yep. That being said, he did manage to take Topuria down.
Yeah.
At the end of, I think, round one. The second thing is, just how much Ige has been taken down, and the things that have tended to take Ige down. Which is that he gets drawn into striking exchanges, swings, and then someone shoots under him. The classic, I think those numbers are actually probably, takedown defense numbers are probably actually a little more reflective of his ability than I was initially thinking, because if we look back to the Bektic fight, the Chan Sung-jung fight, as well as Ivlev. I mean, Ivlev is probably one of the ones where it was the least takedown heavy, right?
No. Ivlev hit him with a ton of takedowns. He took him down 9 times. He took him down 9 times.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, that's I think where the bulk of the bad stat comes from, is that one fight. But the Korean Zombie one is the other one that came to mind. Korean Zombie's wrestling and grappling. Granted, being a significantly bigger man than Dan Ige, as was Ivlev, played its part. But if the verdict of that analysis is that it takes a big and really good wrestler-grappler to get Ige down, and against everyone else he looks really solid, then that is Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell's a great takedown artist. He got Andre Fili down. That to me is Andre Fili is such a perfect gatekeeper because there's a lot of things you can do against him that really speak to your quality. Being able to cleanly get Andre Fili off his feet is big. And Bryce Mitchell managed to do that. And Bryce Mitchell is also, like Evloev, a suffocating positional grappler the moment you make that first move to try to scramble out, which always involves giving your back, going to like a 4 points kind of position, hands and knees, turtling, even if you're not like shelling up into it. And in that moment, Bryce Mitchell will sneak a hook in, and he will get you in some kind of a ride. He will get you in a leg ride, or you will go to half guard, and then he will pass to like a quarter guard position. And I have always been impressed with Bryce Mitchell's ability to trap people, to turn what look like mid-transition positions into lockdown control positions. Something that Khabib was also very good at. Yeah, he's just a great rider. He has more of a wrestler's approach, I think, to ground control. And so you will be constantly in a position where you feel like there's escape routes, but none of them are safe because he leaves you in that position because you have two options, and therefore it's pretty easy for him to know what he's going to do if you take one of them. It is a pick-your-poison kind of control game. And I can see that working against Dan Ige. I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I came in here like, oh, Dan Ige's kind of like Topuria, and I like him. And then I look more at the matchup, and I'm like, can Dan Ige actually definitively stop Bryce Mitchell from hitting takedowns on him? And if he can't, isn't he just going to get out-grappled like he did against Korean Zombie and Movsar Evloev?
Essentially, that is it.
Yeah.
I think even looking back at that Topuria fight, Mitchell probably had more success than I remembered at the time, both chasing Topuria down, with punches towards the end of the fight. It was just that the takedowns stopped working because he couldn't get Topuria to counterpunch at the right, because he couldn't really find Topuria with punches unless he really chased him deep into exchanges.
Yeah.
Then he basically started chasing Topuria deep into exchanges, started getting punches off on him, and was like, oh, I'm winning this. And then Topuria just absolutely destroyed him.
Yeah, just clubbered him.
Punched his head off.
Yeah. Bryce Mitchell's good, man. I think, I don't know why I haven't even seen people talking about it. I just have the feeling that people will be tempted to write him off because of this. And no, Bryce Mitchell... And I think he looks all the better when his full game is functioning, which it seems like it will here. If he can't
this definitely was a fight where his game fell apart.
Yeah.
And afterwards, he was like, I think I might retire.
Yeah.
He didn't. What's he going to do? Is he going to make money off his brain? Go out into the world and...
he's gonna drill through his ball sack for kids at the state fair. Cool stunt that everyone enjoys for the whole family. He's got some other shit going on now, like his girlfriend is blackmailing him or something. He's just a guy who is both figuratively and literally constantly shooting his own dick off. But he's a good fighter. And yeah, even in fights like the Topuria one, or in portions of the Fili one, when he couldn't get him down at the outset, he is super scrappy and resourceful on the feet too. He is a well-rounded fighter.
Yeah. And he did also say that he was very... Again, I rarely put all that much...
Well, he said he was sick, didn't he?
Kind of stuff. Yeah, he said he was very sick before the Topuria fight, and that's why he gassed out so badly. Who knows?
Hey, it happens. Could be.
Yes, increasingly I find myself thinking Ige doesn't really he just doesn't have the control in his game.
Right. He's too much of a counterpuncher. He's not as aggressive. He's not as focused on boxing the opponent out and sticking them on the fence with his jab as Topuria is. Or just being as all out aggressive as Topuria can be.
I mean, notably, Topuria ended up tapping Mitchell because he was so confident that he could just squash him on the ground.
Yeah. So I got to go with Mitchell. Much as I love the boy Dan Ige, and I have super enjoyed seeing him get better, and then felt so vindicated when he stopped fighting like the very best guys in the division and started getting really convincing wins because of it. Just proved how much better he had gotten. But he's back to fighting one of the best guys in the division now.
I'd love to see him win, but I am unfortunately picking Mitchell.
And it's someone who can out-wrestle him, you know?
Yeah, it's still a very winnable fight for Ige, but yeah. Gotta pick Mitchell.
I think it'll be fun. And both these guys are scrappy as hell. Like, Dan Ige does not lose easily. So, I think it'll be a blast to watch. But, Mitchell it is. Okay, let's talk very briefly then, again, about the co-main event from last weekend, shall we? Jack Della Maddalena versus Kevin Holland. And,
I thought this was just like an absolute best case.
Yeah.
Disciplined Kevin Holland fight.
I thought Kevin Holland looked really quite good.
Yeah.
I thought he really did kind of like try to do what he did to Joaquin Buckley.
This is exactly the kind of stuff where we were just like, he should do this, and he's not going to.
And he did it.
He did.
And if he had any ability to adjust, which I think we'll find more and more is just a career-long problem for Kevin Holland, he sort of comes in with one idea, and he can try it harder, but he's not going to try something he didn't plan for, seems to be it. Or the things he didn't plan for that he will try are all stupid. The innovator mindset, as you would put it. If he'd been able to adjust and like mix up his targets a little bit, he probably could have won this fight, because I think he won the second round pretty solidly. And then in the third round, he was doing all the same stuff, but by that point, Maddalena had already figured out how to deal with it all. Because
he just needed he just needed to add one thing.
Yeah, body punches. He needed to be like,
exactly.
Yeah, here's a double jab up top, you're guarding, and I'm just going to slug you in the gut with a right hand. That would have made a huge.
I was going to say yes. Just drive him out of the pocket with those double jabs. Again, great to see them. Love to see it. Thank you, Kevin, for finally bringing the jabs back. But yeah, just bring the hands up and body punch. Or the other thing he could have added is he could have focused more on his own clinch work.
Yeah, exactly.
He was taller when he got into clinch exchanges. Like, he was kind of, bullying Maddalena in kind of a Neil Magny-esque way.
Yeah.
Maddalena was not interested in taking him down. He could have done one of those two things, I think, and probably won this fight. And it also would have, grabbing the clinch would have allowed him to take away the points when he was backed up against the cage and getting flurried on, whilst he was sort of, punching up in his defensive posture, which I'm going to call Philly shell.
Yep, that's the accepted term. Much as I hate it, it is
exactly the correct term. And also, like, sometimes just, hunching up and turning his back, which is a position which I'm going to call Philly shell. Yeah, in both those,
he was getting Philly shellacked.
He could have just grabbed the clinch and, I think, stopped Maddalena's offense and potentially landed some of his own.
Yeah. Yeah. Why are you making that joke about the Philly shell? Why are you? That's a different show that I had that discussion on, Phil. I don't know why you're.
We've had it many times.
I'm pretty sure the fight.
Now I'm going to call every defensive involving someone's hands a Philly shell.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a disagreement with Steffi, who produces the Vivisection with me and Zane. She was like, that's what it's called. She's a big boxing fan. And it is what it's called. It's what everyone calls it. But I was maintaining, I'm pretty sure that term is like 15 years old. And it is applied to a whole boatload of fighters who are not from Philly, and I don't know that you could really argue that it originated in Philly. So why is it the Philly shell? I'm pretty sure they came up with it in the Fight Night games.
Sweet.
And that is where it just caught on, and everyone decided, because I don't think there was a universally accepted term for it. Back in the days when, like, what's his name? The Great White Hope. Jim Jeffries was fighting. He fought in that kind of guard. I don't know that he was using it to shoulder roll, but they called it a crab.
Can we call it the Great White Guard?
The Great White Guard.
We can start popularizing that.
That'd be great, especially because all the fighters who use it so well are definitely white.
Yeah.
It isn't like a hallmark.
The main reason why it sounds great.
It's not like it's become a hallmark of like Black American boxing style. Yeah. That's going to catch on for sure.
All of this is making it sound like a great idea. I love when like badass sounding stuff is just popularized by some stupid nerd shit. Like Hell's Angels were just it was just like an imaginary biker gang in some stupid film, and then the actual bikers were like, "Oh, that's cool."
Yeah, or how like there was no Klan before Birth of a Nation. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's true, but they did make the Klan a bigger deal with that movie. But yeah, I back in Jim Jeffries' day, it was called a crab guard. You know, one claw up, one claw down. And then if you look for people to explain the term, you're like, well, it's because of George Benton, who I believe was from Philly. But then other people call the guard like the shoulder roll, and that is a move you can do out of that guard, but also out of other guards. You can, you know, it's I don't think there's a clear heritage for that term, which is why me being the kind of nerd I am, I'm like, no, that's not it.
Okay.
But go ahead, Phil. It's called the Philly shell. It is a correct term because it's accepted, and everybody knows exactly what you mean when you say it. Lead arm down, covering the belly, relying on the shoulder to defend the chin, right hand cupping the jaw on the other side. Philly shell, sure. Anyway, yes, Kevin Holland uses it badly. He can use it well, but he uses it badly too. He turns his back. He literally runs away. He crashes headfirst into the fence.
Getting kicked in the butt was very funny.
He got kicked and then he held his ass. Ow. Yes. But those moments were like probably consistently the best of the fight for Maddalena, where he just like, oh, you're literally backwards. And he just ran after Kevin Holland and just like hit him from behind to the body. And then waited for him to start to turn when he still couldn't see shit and thwacked him with a left hook. That happened multiple times in the fight. If instead of adopting that posture, Kevin Holland had punched his way into some collar ties, sure. Or if he had just, again, in the third round, it was mostly, because the thing is, this was quite a, and I think this is maybe a sign of growth, but this was quite a patient and long-range fight from Jack Della Maddalena. I think he did it deliberately, and I kind of like to see it. I think he should have been reeling from his experience against Basil Hafez last time around. Clearly didn't like how that fight was going as it was happening. It was completely out of control, even though he was winning it most of the time. And he put himself in a bunch of dicey positions where bad decisions could have really cost him more than they did. And this time around, he was like, I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to use my defense. And I got to say, as good as I thought Kevin looked, I thought Jack's defense looked quite good too.
I mean, this was what you were sort of talking about before. This was someone getting in rounds against the tough opponent.
That's how it felt. And I, on the one hand, I could say, you should have been more aggressive. Why are you letting Kevin off the fence every time that he just like crashes into it? But if this was indeed him just getting some work in and trying out a new way of fighting, then I say more power to him. And he definitely won the fight doing that. And it's not his fault that Kevin didn't make some obvious adjustments to exploit that more defensive game. You know, if Kevin were a better fighter, a better round winner, as we said, a body shot thrown in after the jabs could have made a huge difference. But since he was just headhunting, Maddalena showed slips and rolls and catches and blocks. And if he's going to do that, then all I'd like to see next time is to counter off of those defenses, which he didn't really do much at all. But his defense was there, and it looked good. So I say credit to Madalena and credit to Kevin Holland. I thought both guys one guy showed some new things and looked pretty good doing it, while a little frustrating at the same time. And the other guy showed an old thing that felt new because he hasn't done it in ages, and actually banked around on the experimental new version of Jack Della Maddalena doing so. And was within a hair's breadth of actually doing something slightly different to win the fight. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun, and both guys trying things out in there, and it led to a very interesting contest, which I believe the crowd was booing.
Yeah, they were stupid.
Because they were so spoiled by all like the extremely dumb action fights that had happened just before. But like, this was a good fight. It was a nice simmer, and there was constantly stuff happening. It was fought at a very fast pace, really. I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, it's just the fact that this kind of version of Kevin Holland is just an extremely tricky fighter to look good against.
He should do this all the time.
He's not selling out on offense, and more than that, he's not gassing out.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have is essentially just like a very weird, awkward, like immortal person just constantly throwing offense at you where you don't really know how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
And it was a incredible performance by Della Maddalena to win that fight fairly clearly.
Yeah. Even with the awkward positions, the frankly bad positions his defense puts him in, Kevin Holland is quite hard to hit clean to the head. And when you do hit him, I mean, the man has never been knocked out, and he has had some stupid fights where he's been hit very hard.
I was watching this with a friend, and I was just like, yeah, this guy's first fight in the UFC was 2 weight classes up on short notice against a giant hitter.
Yep.
And he was just like having earth-shaking punches driving his head into the mat, and he was just sitting there like a fucking Looney Tunes character being like, ow!
Yeah, he was commenting on how hard the punches were. This guy hits hard. Yeah. So, cool, interesting, weird fight. Perfect Kevin Holland fight, really, even if he didn't win. And I like it. I like seeing Jack Della Maddalena. He's right on the cusp of contending. He had a shaky performance last time out. He's trying new things. It's great. He's adjusting.
Tough.
All right. Well, that'll be it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. A lot of interesting stuff to cover, and I have no doubt that we will have interesting things to talk about next week. We didn't mention them all, but in addition to Fiziev, Gamrot, and Mitchell Ige, this upcoming card, at least for now, also has Marina Rodriguez versus Michelle Waterson-Gomez. It's got Ricardo Ramos versus Charles Jourdain. It's got... Brian Battle's actually a little better than I thought he was. He's fighting AJ Fletcher, who has the shortest arms in the entire organization. It's got Tim Means, Andre Fialho. It's got one of my personal dark horse favorites, Jacob Malkoun versus Cody Brundage. It has the aforementioned hilarious heavyweight fight. It really has a little bit of everything, and many of them actually feel kind of relevant. So it's a good card.
It is.
Yeah. So we'll be back to talk about that next week. Until then, make sure you find us on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil at Boxing Bush. That's me. Check out our Patreon. We did publish last week a bonus episode where we kind of talked about, now feels, at least for the next couple weeks, irrelevant, but why the UFC schedule has been so absolutely dire in 2023. We tried to sort of pick apart whether that was us being nostalgic for the time when we fell in love with the sport of MMA, which is surely a factor, or whether things really had gotten worse, and if so, why. And I thought that was a very interesting discussion. You can find that over on our Patreon. And we'll catch you next week. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.